The last word with Lawrence O'Donnell starts right now. Hey, Lawrence.
Hey, Jen. There is so much to cover tonight with Donald Trump once again finding new territory where no other president has ever gone.
And not in a good way.
No, not at all, as usual.
Yeah, exactly. Well, look forward to hearing what you have to say, Lawrence.
Thanks, Jen. Thank you. Well, what a week it has been in the madness of Donald Trump, the decline and fall of Donald Trump, with him tonight now calling for the execution of members of Congress, the first president of the United States to call for members of Congress to be put to death. The American news media has been so overwhelmed by Donald Trump since his emergence on the political stage that the New York Times, which continues to do great work in covering Donald Trump and the world, has lost its perspective on the enormity of what Donald Trump decided to say today about members of Congress, saying something that he says is, quote, punishable by death. Had any other president of the United States ever said anything like it, the New York Times would have a 6-inch headline about it and a front page devoted entirely to that madness and the reaction to that madness. And tonight, it's not even close to the lead story in the New York Times. It is impossible to make too much of this story. And the only way to try to reduce the historic and moral and legal importance of what Donald Trump said is to internalize the notion that Donald Trump's words do not matter. And the American news media has done that. And they have done it for exactly one president. The old rules will come roaring back as soon as Donald Trump isn't president anymore. The next Democratic president better be prepared for the New York Times and the rest of the news media to scream attention to any phrasing on any subject by a Democratic president that they think is imperfect. A week ago, Donald Trump had one member of Congress in the basement of the White House, turning the Situation Room into a police interrogation room with the top cop in the country, Donald Trump's Attorney General, and others in the room trying to get one member of Congress to confess that she was wrong to sign that discharge petition in the House of Representatives, signed mostly by Democrats, to force the release of the Epstein files. That's what Donald Trump was trying to do 1 week ago, not punish members of Congress by death, but just change one mind, one Republican mind. And he failed. And his attorney general failed. And Congresswoman Lauren Boebert did the honorable thing and stared back at the most powerful law enforcement official in the country and the president she has been so loyal to and said no. If she had said yes, if she had gone back to the House of Representatives and taken her signature off that discharge petition, then that bill never would have come to a vote. That's all Donald Trump had to do. That's how close he came. He just had to convince one Republican to take her name off that discharge petition, and Donald Trump a week ago wasn't powerful enough to do that. He wasn't powerful enough to force one Republican to bend to his will. And that's when we saw the first real crack in the Trump wall in the Congress, the Trump wall that forbids Republicans from ever voting with Democrats on anything. Never mind something that's personally important to Donald Trump, which is to continue to hide the details of his friendship with the child sex trafficker, Jeffrey Epstein, who said he was Donald Trump's closest friend for 10 years. There has been no more important vote in Donald Trump's presidency than the vote that was about him and his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. And all Donald Trump had to do to prevent that vote was to convince one Republican woman to take her name off that list, take her signature off that list. And Donald Trump couldn't do that. That was inconceivable just days before. It seemed impossible to imagine that Donald Trump, when he really needed a Republican member of the House to do what he wanted, that he wouldn't be able to convince that Republican. It's impossible to see the weakness of a dictatorship until defiance exposes that weakness. The collapse of the Trump dictatorship in the Congress, the collapse of the Trump wall in the House of Representatives, and the Trump wall down the center aisle of the United States Senate, the Trump wall that prevented Republicans from ever voting with Democrats, the collapse of that wall happened as dramatically and quickly as the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989, after 29 years of people being shot in the back trying to climb over that wall to escape East Berlin, murdered by a Soviet-controlled dictatorship. Suddenly, it was all over. And a week before, no one saw it coming.
Good evening, live from the Berlin Wall on the most historic night in this wall's history. What you see behind me is a celebration of this new policy announced today by the East German government that now, for the first time since the wall was erected in 1961, people will be able to move through freely. This crowd has gathered here tonight spontaneously. From the East German side, they have been training water cannon, as you can see on some of the celebrants, but it doesn't seem to make much difference. We'll show you some videotape now as well of what happened earlier tonight when there were even more people atop the wall. The West German police have moved in here, suggesting that they move back, saying that the situation is already complicated enough, but it doesn't seem to make any difference.
NBC News' Tom Brokaw was the only American news reporter there on November 9th, 1989. The CIA didn't predict that. The people imprisoned in East Germany rose up in massive numbers and began pouring through the checkpoints where they used to be murdered for taking too many steps toward that wall. And by the time Tom Brokaw was there, 20,000 people had rushed through that checkpoint. And as people climbed to the top of the Berlin Wall that night, and the pathetic water cannons from the dictatorship side of the wall sprayed on them, those protesters mocked the wall. They mocked the deadly fearsomeness of that wall. They instantly turned that wall of death into a joke. And then East and West Germans went to work with their own hands and tore it down. No government tore down that wall. No politician tore down that wall. The people tore down that wall. Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's victims, almost all of whom are now survivors, tore down the Trump wall in the House and the Senate. And we watched them do it. And a week before the unanimous vote against Donald Trump, no one saw it coming. Just like no one saw the collapse of the Berlin Wall coming a week before it fell, the collapse of the Berlin Wall was the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. A year later, the Soviet Union was tottering. And 2 years after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the Soviet Union was gone. Is that where we are tonight? We know Donald Trump will be gone in 3 years. But will the people tear down Trumpism before that? A year after the unanimous vote in the House of Representatives and the Senate against Donald Trump, voters will go to the polls in this country to decide how many Trump supporters they want in the House and how many in the Senate and how many opponents of Donald Trump they want in the House and in the Senate. No one knew in that week when the Berlin Wall collapsed that the Soviet Union was then going to collapse. And that's where we are tonight. We don't know what will happen next year. But now we know what's possible. We've seen the collapse of the Trump wall in Congress, and we know that Donald Trump is weaker than he has ever been as president. And it may be that we are a year away from Donald Trump coming under the full control of a Democratic House of Representatives and a Democratic United States Senate, and that would bring Trumpism to an end. The Congress can fully control Donald Trump's madness, but the Republican Congress so far refuses to do that. A Democratic Congress will control Donald Trump. A Democratic Congress will investigate Donald Trump and everyone working for him, and they all know it. And so a week after trying and failing to convince one Republican member of Congress to change her mind, Donald Trump turns to threatening death for 6 Democratic members of Congress because they said this.
I'm Senator Alyssa Slotkin.
Senator Mark Kelly.
Representative Chris Deluzio.
Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander.
Representative Chrissy Houlihan.
Congressman Jason Crow. I was a captain in the United States Navy.
Former CIA officer.
Former Navy.
Former paratrooper and Army Ranger.
Former intelligence officer.
Former Air Force.
We want to speak directly to members of the military
And the intelligence community.
Who take risks each day
To keep Americans safe.
We know you are under enormous stress and pressure right now.
Americans trust their military.
But that trust is at risk.
This administration is pitting our uniformed military
And intelligence community professionals.
against American citizens.
like us. You all swore an oath.
To protect and defend this Constitution.
And right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad.
But from right here at home.
Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You must refuse illegal orders.
No one has to carry out orders that violate the law.
Or our Constitution.
We know this is hard.
And that it's a difficult time to be a public servant.
But whether you're serving in the CIA,
In the Army.
Our Navy.
The Air Force.
Your vigilance is critical.
and know that we have your back.
Because now, more than ever,
The American people need you.
We need you to stand up for our laws.
Our Constitution.
And who we are as Americans. Don't give up.
Don't give up.
don't give up.
Don't give up the ship.
At 9:08 a.m. today, Donald Trump wrote his first lies about what you just heard. And please remember that everything I report to you that Donald Trump said about this is a lie. He said it's called seditious behavior at the highest level. Each one of these traitors to our country should be arrested and put on trial. Their words cannot be allowed to stand. We won't have a country anymore. 3 exclamation points. An example must be set. There is nothing seditious about it. The only logic of Donald Trump's statement is that he wants to be able to issue illegal orders, and he wants the American military to follow his illegal orders. It is impossible for anyone who understands the English language and the law to disagree with a single word that any of those members of Congress said. And everyone today who has objected to what they said has left out the fact that they are all referring only to illegal orders. 12 minutes later, Donald Trump wrote, "This is really bad and dangerous to our country. Their words cannot be allowed to stand. Seditious behavior from traitors, lock them up, ? Now, no, they will never be locked up. They will never be charged. There is nothing to investigate. Every word they said is true and is legally correct. And then an hour later, Donald Trump said, seditious behavior, punishable by death. To which Senator Chuck Schumer said this.
Let's be crystal clear. The President of the United States is calling for the execution of elected officials.
And what did the Republican Speaker of the House say? The man who spent the year burning up all of his political power, if he had any, while functioning as Donald Trump's servant in trying and completely failing to block the vote to release the Epstein files, the vote that knocked down the Trump wall in the House of Representatives. What did he say?
The words that the president chose are not the ones that I would use, okay? Obviously, I don't think that this is, these are crimes punishable by death or any of that, okay?
And there you have it, refuting Donald Trump right away. That's the first thing he said. That is not a defense of Donald Trump. And that is a legal refutation of Donald Trump by a former law professor, completely refuting what Donald Trump said legally. That's the Speaker of the House saying, no, words are not punishable by death, especially legally accurate words. The Speaker, being a politician, then added, quote, sometimes he uses heated rhetoric, okay? But do any of you agree that that's appropriate, that they should be telling young members of the military to defy orders? No one told members of the military to defy orders. They told members of the military that they should not follow illegal orders. And every Republican And every Rupert Murdoch-owned propaganda outlet that tries to smear those Democrats with the accusation that they told the American military not to follow orders is lying, and they know they are lying, and they are consciously lying about what those Democrats said. And that is the only way that those liars know how to respond to a situation like this. It's why it is a complete waste of time and a violation of sanity to bring Trump defenders onto television shows on subjects like this, because they will all lie and claim that the Democrats told the military not to follow orders. They will all leave out the word illegal. They will all lie. That is how they do it. Everyone at West Point is trained not to issue and not to follow illegal orders. And tonight, some people want to pretend that there's something wrong with saying that out loud. The American military should never follow illegal orders. We should all know that, and we should all be willing to say that. And there has never been a more appropriate time to issue that reminder than during a presidency that has already issued illegal orders, according to federal judges. 2 federal judges have ruled that Donald Trump's ordering of the National Guard out in California and in the District of Columbia are illegal orders. We never needed a warning like this for any other president under any other presidency. But we absolutely need it now with a convicted criminal in the presidency, a convicted felon who doesn't know what the law is. Tomorrow, Donald Trump is going to meet with the mayor-elect of New York City in the Oval Office, Zohran Mamdani, who Donald Trump has lied about relentlessly, calling him a communist without knowing what a communist is. And Donald Trump has repeatedly accused the mayor-elect of being anti-Semitic. And tonight, Zohran Mamdani has helped set the stage for tomorrow's meeting by calling something Donald Trump has done disgusting. The mayor-elect used that one word in his retweet of a Washington Post tweet saying, U.S. Coast Guard will no longer classify swastikas, nooses, and Confederate flags as hate symbols. Thank you, Donald Trump. Donald Trump's entire assault on universities in America is based on the pretense that Donald Trump cares about anti-Semitism in universities, and he's going to police it. There was much more anti-Semitism in American universities when Donald Trump was in college, and he never said a word about it. There was much more anti-Semitism in New York, where Donald Trump grew up, and he never said a word about it. There was much more anti-Semitism in America when Donald Trump was in college, and he never, ever said a word about it. Imagine if Columbia or Harvard or any American university issued a new rule today saying the Nazi symbol is okay in your dorm room. Imagine what Donald Trump would do. Donald Trump doesn't care about anti-Semitism. That is what he claims to justify his unconstitutional attempt to seize control of American universities, and Donald Trump has once again proved that with his loosening the restrictions on Nazi symbols. And he already proved it when he pardoned this guy. That's Robert Packer, a Trump supporter who looked into Donald Trump's soul from his perspective and saw someone who agrees with him. And so Robert Packer went to the Capitol on January 6th to try to overturn the presidential election for Donald Trump. And on Donald Trump's first day in office, his first act was to pardon that virulent anti-Semite wearing that Camp Auschwitz sweatshirt. Robert Packer and everyone else who went to the Capitol for him that day. Imagine if a Columbia student were wearing that hoodie on Donald Trump's friend and supporter there. Imagine if a Columbia student were wearing that hoodie during a protest. Donald Trump would probably want that student executed. That's what he'd call for. But you wear that sweatshirt when you're supporting Donald Trump, and he loves you. He says you're good people. He says you deserve a pardon because you're a good person. That's what Donald Trump said about those people when he gave them those pardons, including that guy with the Camp Auschwitz sweatshirt, that virulent, Nazi-supporting anti-Semite. Donald Trump wants to execute 6 members of Congress for publicly reciting military law. Will he want to execute the professors at West Point who teach that military law and who say that sentence out loud? Does he want them executed too? But Donald Trump always wants to honor every Confederate general who spent every day of the Civil War murdering American soldiers. They all committed treason. Every single member of the Confederate Army committed treason. Every member of the command staff of that army committed treason. Robert E. Lee committed treason, and Donald Trump honors them all, worships them. They all, in fact, legally earned execution for treason, but were shown mercy. And many were allowed to return to service as members of Congress in the country they fought to destroy as traitors. The poisoned mind of Donald Trump thinks Confederate generals are heroes, thinks Confederate generals who killed more Americans than any other military force in history are heroes, and that American veterans serving in Congress who understand the military and the law far better than Donald Trump can understand anything should be punished with death. That's what the madness of Donald Trump sounds like when the Trump wall is coming down. The Trump wall fell down this week. Donald Trump is at an all-time low in his polling numbers. Republicans in Congress are at an all-time low in their polling numbers. And we know tonight that nothing will stop the Trump madness, but the Congress can stop Donald Trump's power. And we may be a year away from that happening. And as Donald Trump becomes more politically dangerous for Republicans in Congress every day, his power will get weaker every day. And his threats will surely become even more insane. Andrew Weissmann will join us after this break. While Donald Trump dreams of prosecuting Democrats he hates and eventually putting them to death simply for speaking the truth, his attempts to prosecute others he hates are falling apart in more ways than we could have easily imagined when these ridiculous prosecutions began. Donald Trump's attempt to prosecute James Comey is now collapsing on almost every point, including the indictment itself, which turns out to be a document that was not seen by all of the grand jurors. And in Donald Trump's attempt to prosecute Senator Adam Schiff for mortgage fraud, there is the possibility of criminal conduct being exposed by Donald Trump's thugs. MS Now reports, quote, a federal grand jury in Maryland is investigating whether Federal Housing Finance Agency Director Bill Pulte and Justice Department official Ed Martin illegally shared sensitive grand jury information with unauthorized people, according to 2 people familiar with the probe. The investigation is focused on whether the mortgage fraud investigations of Senator Adam Schiff and possibly of New York Attorney General Letitia James have been tainted by the investigative methods allegedly used by Pulte and Martin. Improperly sharing sensitive grand jury information is a serious breach of Justice Department rules. Investigators who are found to have done so can face criminal charges, including obstruction of justice, contempt of court, and also stiff fines. FBI agents have asked witnesses to turn over records and have interviewed them about people who may have presented themselves as federal investigators working on behalf of Pulte or Martin, according to the sources and documents reviewed by MS Now. Leading off our discussion tonight is Andrew Weissmann, former FBI General Counsel and former Chief of the Criminal Division in the Eastern District of New York. He's also an MS Now legal analyst. Andrew, so I suppose the bad news is that Donald Trump is on a rampage of malicious and vindictive and pointless prosecutions, and the good news is they couldn't be more incompetent about carrying it out.
You know, during the first Trump administration, there were many who said that the malevolence, fortunately, is matched with incompetence, said that it was harder to carry it out. At the beginning of Trump 2.0, there was a sense that he had his ducks in a row, that he had people who had prepared. There was Project 2025, and it is definitely something where there was a seeming veneer of greater competence in carrying this out. But this is what it turns out. If you engage in basically taking a hatchet to the federal government and you have DOJ firing people who are experienced and competent, if you don't put the best, most experienced people, regardless of policy, in the positions of Attorney General, head of the FBI, head of Homeland Security, head of our healthcare system, this is what you get. And so just to focus on Lindsay Halligan, the new, completely inexperienced prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia, what is going on there is it's beyond laughable in terms of the kind of mistakes that she is making over and over again, where you have federal judges saying you may have committed a violation of the Fourth Amendment, of the Fifth Amendment, of attorney-client privilege. You may have improperly instructed the grand jury, and you may not have presented the actual charging instrument correctly. The first one may have been presented correctly, but the second, there's a complete inconsistency now in the record about what actually the grand jurors saw, if anything. And all of that would go away if you had a competent prosecutor who knew what the law was and was going to follow it.
But of course, there would be no indictments if you had an actual competent prosecutor. There was a competent prosecutor who wrote a memo saying, we are declining to try to prosecute this because there's nothing there on James Comey. The judge knows that declination memo, as they call it, was written. The judge has asked the prosecutors about that, and they have refused to answer whether it exists because they were told, told the judge that the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer, told them, don't answer that question if the judge asks you.
So that's absolutely right. And, you know, you can contrast that to what we're seeing in Maryland. And if the reporting is accurate, and there is an open investigation that is looking at the conduct of people in the government, which, by the way, in any other administration, you would say, of course that would happen, because every administration I've ever worked in, Republican or Democratic, would go after crimes and didn't care whether it was a Republican or Democrat, or an independent or somebody in no party who had committed the crimes. And so that's what's sort of remarkable about the Maryland reporting. The one thing I want to say there, just to clarify on this issue of the Deputy Attorney General saying that there's a deliberative process privilege that would keep a declination memo not public, that you would keep that private. That is not a position that is so outlandish. That's the kind of thing that you could imagine, and I could imagine other administrations saying. The difference is here is because there is such a strong vindictive prosecution motion pending, that declination memo, or at least the existence of it, is so relevant to the defense application and the defense motion. And so I think that with briefing on this issue, the court's going to say that the deliberative process privilege is overcome by the need for the defense to have the fact of the existence of the declination memo there to help prove that there was vindictive prosecution, that somebody who was politically motivated ignored what the career people and even the first Trump-appointed U.S. attorney had concluded.
And Andrew, as we saw, Donald Trump will continue to try to find ways to distract from the Epstein files, including now threatening the lives of members of Congress, threatening war with Venezuela, whatever it takes. They haven't seemed to learn the lesson that nothing holds interest in the Epstein files more than refusing to release them.
Donald Trump right now could release the files. He doesn't need Congress. He doesn't need a congressional deadline. He can do that. He also, if he didn't want to do that, could make it absolutely clear in one of his so-called truth socials. I hate calling it that. But he could tweet out, I am going to order that every single reference to me, every single picture of me that is in or that are in the Epstein files will be released. He can make it crystal clear that he is not going to play games, to use the term that Chuck Schumer used, that she wants no funny business. The fact that he is not doing that leads me, and I think many others, to be quite cynical about what they're going to do to drag this out. And it makes you sort of very cynical about what is in there, that they are engaging in a sort of death by 1,000 cuts.
Well, Donald Trump knows, and Donald Trump has decided that really no one should ever see it. We will be on this the Epstein files case for a while. Andrew Weissmann, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
And coming up, as Donald Trump continues to be consumed by his declining mental function and his political madness, he has decided to go to war with the important swing state of Pennsylvania. That's next. A new Fox poll shows Donald Trump with the kind of disapproval numbers that can lead to disaster for the Republican Party in next year's elections, and the Republican Party knows that. 58% of registered voters disapprove of the job Donald Trump is doing. 61% disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy, and 63% correctly disapprove of Donald Trump's illegal and unconstitutional and very costly tariffs. And with disastrous numbers like that, Donald Trump always knows how to make the situation worse. Donald Trump now wants to go to war with the important swing state of Pennsylvania. The Associated Press reports the Trump administration threatened Thursday to withhold nearly $75 million in funding if Pennsylvania does not immediately revoke what the administration claims are illegally issued commercial driver's licenses to immigrants. The move by U.S. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy to target Pennsylvania follows similar action against California. Both states are run by Democratic governors who have criticized President Donald Trump's administration and who are viewed as potential top-shelf contenders to be the party's 2028 presidential nominee. Joining us now is Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania. He's the top Democrat on the House Budget Committee and a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. Congressman Boyle, I remember, I think, when Donald Trump knew that you don't want to get into a fight with Pennsylvania if you're in national politics.
Yeah, I will say, as a born and raised Philadelphian, we're rather proud of our record of defeating kings, whether it was 249 years ago or more recently in 2020. There is no more important battleground state in our national politics than Pennsylvania. But here is why I always feared a second Trump term much more than a first term. Because he can't run for re-election in 2028, he is even far worse and more unhinged this time. That's why he's able to knock down part of the White House. That's why he's able to order his political opponents actually be indicted and be prosecuted. You are seeing things in this term that, as bad as the first one was, you just didn't see, because now he doesn't have to worry about winning the votes of Pennsylvanians and the other battleground states.
It's such an important point that he is not running again. That, there's been some nonsensical TV talk about that. It's always been an absurd thing to even discuss. but it does make him so much more dangerous because he just doesn't care. And he absolutely does not care what happens to the Republican Party or the Republican candidate for president after him.
That's exactly right. I mean, just look at the reaction 2 weeks ago. We saw massive Democratic victories, even greater in scope and scale than we saw in the 2017, 2018 blue wave. We saw it in Virginia, New Jersey, Georgia, California, but we also saw it in Pennsylvania. I mean, suburban Bucks County, which is such a swing county every election, it's two big races. The Democratic candidate won by double digits. In Erie County, again, massive upset. The Democratic candidate wins for executive. You saw it in county after county of our swing state, very similar to what we saw throughout the nation. So you would think if you were running for re-election for real, you would actually modulate your behavior. You would really consider this an emergency. Donald Trump hasn't done any of that at all. In fact, he's too busy having great Gatsby parties and planning out what he's going to do next as part of his great, awful redecoration of the White House.
So your House Republican colleagues experienced that one day of liberation from Donald Trump where they got to vote against him. They really all got to vote against him for the first time. What do you think that means for them as they watch Donald Trump continue to cost them politically?
You know, there's an important point I want to make about this that I think has kind of gone unsaid in the last few days. I always hear the term the Republican moderates or the House Republican moderates. Not one of them actually stood up to Donald Trump when it counted. It actually was the people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and some others who certainly wouldn't have been called a lot of things, have never been called moderate. The reality is, whether it was the awful reconciliation bill this summer, which will end up being the biggest loss of health care in American history, or the release of the Epstein files, it is always the so-called moderates that are sticking with Donald Trump every single time.
Congressman Brendan Boyle, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Coming up, with a year-end deadline looming, Donald Trump knows this could be his last chance to kill the Affordable Care Act, and he seems to be trying to do that. Senator Tammy Baldwin will join us next. With Congress facing a year-end deadline to extend expiring Affordable Care Act subsidies that are paid as tax credits for at least 20 million Americans who cannot afford health insurance, Donald Trump told Congress not to, quote, waste your time and energy on that. Today, House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries described how Democrats in the House and Senate plan to force the issue on Republicans.
The Affordable Care Act tax credits expire on December 31st. Donald Trump and Republicans don't give a damn. They've done nothing to deal with the health care crisis that Republicans have created. We need to act with urgency now and extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits. We're going to work closely with our Democratic colleagues in the Senate on the vote that is scheduled no later than the second week of December on a Democratic proposal related to extending the Affordable Care Act tax credits. And I expect that we're going to be in alignment. And at this point, Republicans just need to take yes for an answer. Say yes to your constituents who you're jamming up right now and who are about to suffer even more from the Republican health care crisis.
Joining us now is Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin. She's a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee and the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. And Senator, what can we expect, having just heard Leader Jeffries talk about the possibilities in the Senate, what can we expect from the Senate on this?
Well, the ball is in the Republicans' court right now. They can either be a part of the solution and help us extend those tax credits, help American families be able to afford their premiums, or they could be a part of the problem, and thereby they will own a crisis of their making and the higher costs that so many Americans, over 20 million, will see next year. And the urgency could not be more pronounced. Right now is open enrollment. It closes in less than a month. And people are going on to healthcare.gov, and some are seeing their prices double, triple, quadruple. I've seen one example in Wisconsin where the premiums are going up 800%. They will own this if they don't work with us. You know, we had elections in this country just a couple weeks ago in a few states. Those elections were about affordability. Republicans can join us and provide some relief, give families a break if they join us in extending these tax credits.
This seems like the Democratic legislative crusade for the rest of the year. And this is the one that has tremendous public support.
You know, it is about the cost of things. It is about the affordability. It is about the more difficult path that this president and Republicans have made for Americans, working Americans, to join the middle class. You know, in the last election, over a year ago, I would say that Donald Trump had it right with the diagnosis that Americans were concerned about the cost of groceries, health care, housing, childcare, fuel, energy, on and on and on. But as soon as he became president, he's made things worse through his tariffs and through what he calls the one big beautiful bill, what we call the ugly betrayal. But no matter what you call it, he's taken away nutrition assistance for working families. He's taken away Medicaid benefits in the future. And that was a tax bill. You would think that the centerpiece would be extending tax credits for working families to be able to afford their health care. But no, it was instead tax breaks that disproportionately help the very wealthy. This will be about making things much more affordable, helping our constituents be able to make ends meet. I think of all the stories that I've heard as people are shopping for their health care. Nancy in Milwaukee is a small business owner and breast cancer survivor. She pays this year $370 a month for her premiums. Next year, it'll be $1,150. That's a threefold increase. She doesn't know how she's going to be able to juggle her small business and her healthcare expenses. And she is one of millions of Americans in that horrible predicament. We need our Republican colleagues to step up and be part of the solution and not own this disaster.
Senator Tammy Baldwin, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back. Senator Tammy Baldwin gets tonight's last word.